Welcome to the channel. I'm James Salvatore, and next to me is the all-new 2022 Mercedes EQS 450 Plus. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking a lot about the features, and then I'm going to drive it and share my thoughts on it. But before we get into the video, if you are new to the channel, please consider subscribing. As you can see below, I do lots of cool stuff on the channel, and if you're a car person, you're not going to want to miss out. So hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Let's get into the video. You get wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless charging conveniently located with 64 different ambient light colors to choose from. When it comes to performance, the EQS 450 has 329 horsepower and 417 foot-pounds of torque, mated to a single-speed transmission. It has fully self-leveling adaptive air suspension, and the range is estimated to be about 350 miles on a charge cycle. Charging the EQS from 10 to 80% is estimated to take about 31 minutes on direct current, and on alternating current you should expect about 11 and a half hours to reach a full charge. And in the rear, you get 22 cubic feet of cargo space with the seats up, and with the seats down, you get 63 cubic feet of cargo space. Driving this car right away, it makes very clear to me that this is focused purely on luxury driving and, kind of A to B driving. This, although, it has a good amount of torque on the low end, this definitely isn't an EV car that you say to yourself, wow, this is like crazy quick, for something that's like this. This is definitely not that car. This is the car that you get purely if you want a very isolated, quiet, refined experience. I mean, it's just so quiet, especially once you turn all the fake noise off, which personally I think just doesn't match the car at all, so I turned it off right away. You really are isolated in this car. I mean, hell, the loudest thing you hear is the brakes. When you're stopping, you literally hear the pads like on the rotors. This is definitely much smoother than any V6 S-Class ever was, because that's what this is supposed to be. The EQS 580 is supposed to be the equivalent of the V8 S-Class. The 450 is supposed to be the equivalent of the old 6-cylinder S-Classes. The cool thing about an EV car is that, you almost get V12 levels of just smoothness from taking off because, there is no lag. Nothing has to spool up. Although you don't have a lot of power with this power plant, it still is very extremely smooth in the way it delivers power, and the torque is there right away. So this car pulling away from a stoplight and around town, definitely feels the way it should, in my opinion. But let's get some acceleration in, shall we? All right, I mean, yeah, it is, in terms of acceleration, it is quick. This isn't gonna be the EV where, like I said earlier, where you hit the accelerator and you're thrown back in your seat in awe. But for the size of this, the weight, and, for the purpose it's trying to accomplish, I think that this is an adequate level of power. Now I've put on the adaptive cruise control, and we're gonna see just how well this does on a back road, because a lot of these systems have been out for a few years now and they're good on highways, but I found that the weakness for these cars is usually on back roads because they're not straight, they have turns, they're not able to predict how much to turn. So let's see how this does. It's pretty neat. So it's mapped out the road, as you can see on the driver's information center. It's keeping good distance from the car in front of me. You could actually set the distance you want it to keep. I have it set at 300 feet. And it's mapping out the road, it's mapping out the cars in front of me. And it's doing everything. It's doing the steering, the brake, and the accelerator, which is pretty cool. You know, it's nice to just get to sit back. This is doing a great job on the road, you know, tracking cars, tracking the lines on the road. Like, I've had to pretty much almost do nothing. But the thing that I noticed is, like my older S-Class, it's not able to go through intersections. And what I mean by that is, basically, once the lines on the road aren't consistent anymore, that's what it's using to map everything out, it gets confused and will kind of just wig out. So if you're using this, just keep in mind when you're approaching intersections, you really do have to pay attention. You just can't leave it up to the car. But other than that, I mean, it's going pretty flawless here. So it's telling me to put my hands on the wheel because it's kind of unsure of what it's doing, because once again, I don't see a solid line on the road. But I would say, yeah, I'd probably rate this at a 7.5 out of 10 in terms of like how advanced it is. I'd say about 75-80% of the time you don't have to do much. You just have to pay attention to when it's not sure of what it's doing. And the visibility in here is really good. So I'm looking out the windshield and it's raked so low that it almost looks like you're looking literally right down on the road, because you don't have a long hood in this car. You know, that kind of threw me off, you know, coming from the regular S-Class to this, was not having that big long hood. Personally, I like having that big long hood because I feel like that's like a characteristic of an S-Class, but I realize it's just not necessary. And another thing that's interesting to play with is the recuperation. So because Mercedes is kind of using this steering wheel throughout all their models, they have paddle shifters on the wheel. So instead of actually shifting gears in this, if you hit the downshift paddle, you could play around with recuperation. So right now I have it in strong recuperation, and I have to say, yeah, it's definitely as described. I just took my foot off the accelerator for like a second, and I went from like 40 miles an hour to like 10 and almost like no distance at all, which is kind of cool. You know, if I'm stuck in traffic, I won't have to use the brakes at all. I could definitely see this saving on brakes in the long run. I just put the car in sport. Let's see if you could hustle this around. Now, I'm not saying drive it like a sports car, because you're not going to drive an S-Class like a sports car. But if you're in a hurry to get somewhere and you want to be able to drive quick, you know, you got back roads to go through, I just want to see how confident this feels in corners. And I have to say, right away, compared to the EQS 580, this handles so much better. There's so much less body roll with this. The 580 was really rolling into the corners, and I think that really has to do with having the motor on the front axle and the bigger batteries. You know, there's a lot more weight for that car to carry. This definitely feels more confident around the corners, but the braking feel between both cars is pretty much the same. The brakes just, yeah, I mean, like, you really gotta dig into them to get any bite. To sum up my thoughts, you know, because I kind of had to collect myself for a second and, you know, really think here, I would say that the EQS 450 is a good package overall, especially when you consider the price point that it's in. No, this is not the EV that's gonna, you know, knock your socks off with speed. This is truly focused on luxury, comfort, and, you know, just being a very refined experience. And in that aspect, I really do think they've pulled it off. You know, you have cutting edge tech in here. I mean, yes, you don't have the hyperscreen, but like I said earlier, I actually do prefer it this way. I think it looks better in person with this over the hyperscreen. The hyperscreen is cool, and I think it's like a really good marketing gimmick, but you're not missing out on any of the functionality from those screens. The right screen is just redundant of the center infotainment screen, and it just kind of adds one layer of depth to the dash overall. This, having the multiple screens, having this float over the dash, just kind of, I don't know, it just makes the interior look a little bit more interesting, in my opinion. But getting back to the point, you know, there's a lot of positives to have here. The stereo system is amazing. The only areas where this definitely lacks is if you live in a climate where, if you live in an area where you're going to experience winter, just don't buy one of these. Get the EQS 580 because you're going to need the all-wheel drive. The rear drive isn't going to get you by. And if you're going to be carrying around taller passengers, they're definitely not going to be comfortable back there. And I wouldn't recommend this as the S-Class to buy if you're going to be driven in it for some reason. You know, some people do get drivers. So if you are going to be driven in it, this is definitely not the car, because the rear seat is a bit cramped compared to the standard car. But besides that, as a first attempt for an electric vehicle on Mercedes part, I like that they have included 2 different trim levels, you know, with the EQS 450 and the 580. To sum up my thoughts on the EQS overall, I would say that it's a great package. Between how smooth it is and the cutting edge tech you get, and the fact that 75–80% of the time you won't even have to touch the wheel because you have the adaptive cruise control, it really is an amazing car. No, you don't get the hyper screen, but you shouldn't care, because honestly, both ways look good. I prefer this look better, but you may not. But keep in mind, you don't lose any of the functionality. You get the really neat ambient lighting in the interior, which really gives some depth to it. And if you're thinking about what I said earlier when it comes to performance, no, it's not a very fast EV, but the smoothness that you get with this power plant and having all that torque down low is what really matters in a car like this. And it does so much better. Keep in mind, it's replacing the V6 S-Class. It does so much better than the V6 S-Class could have ever have done. And the fact that you get 350 miles of range means that you're not put in that EV car category of having range anxiety. So I think what I'm trying to say overall is it's definitely worth your time to go down and actually check one out. That sums up things for the EQS 450. If you haven't done so yet and you enjoyed the video, be sure not to forget to hit that like button for me, because it really helps with the YouTube algorithm. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on that bell notification so you don't miss out on next week's video. Before I go, I'd like to say a special thanks to my friends down at Mercedes-Benz of Fairfield, Connecticut for making today's video possible. They're an awesome, super helpful, friendly group of people to work with. And if you're in the market for a new Mercedes and you're in the area, be sure to check them out. I'm going to leave their contact information below. With that said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next video.